So far, we've examined the basics of the circle of fifths along with the melodic minor scale. So, at this point, we basically have the ability to work out the notes that comprise the different keys in major, minor, harmonic minor, and melodic minor, and all hopefully without having to fumble through the booklet that came with Fundamental 2. Now, before we go on to examining melody in further detail, I just want to spend this session revisiting the circle of fifths again, and basically just quickly run over some of its other uses. Now, I'll be the first to admit these other uses are not all related to melody, and I do know that this DVD is about melody, but as I mentioned in the introduction, we've reached the stage here where everything falls into place. Our theory of bass, harmony, and now melody all combined together into one. So basically, since we're discussing music theory on a much larger whole, I do want to take advantage of that, and as well as discuss melody, I also want to mention the other uses for this circle of fifths. For example, the circle can also be used to calculate chord progressions, key modulation, and it can even help us identify the key of a song. And whilst they're not all exactly melody related, they are important and a part of the theory, so I do want to look at them anyway. Now, the first thing I want to touch upon is how we can use this circle of fifths here to identify the key of a song. Now, there's a number of reasons we may want to identify the key signature of a song. Perhaps it's to give our music the same feeling or energy as a different track, or perhaps it's because we want to understand the music a little better by examining other tracks, or maybe we want to remix it, or we just want to transpose their song to a different key to see how it sounds. Whatever the reason, we can identify the key of a song by examining a few notes in the track and then comparing them to our circle of fifths. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit here, identifying the notes being played by ear is a different subject altogether, and it is something I am planning on covering in future Fundamental series, alongside white and pink frequency recognition for your mixing. But for the moment, we'll just say that you know the notes. Perhaps you've downloaded the MIDI file, or a mate is pitch perfect and told you the notes himself. Either way, we're going to have to assume that you know the notes, and that basically you've heard 4 black notes in our imaginary song. At the moment, we're unsure if the sharps are flats. We just know that there was 4 black notes played. So, what's the key? Well, using our circle of fifths, it's really not that hard. The first thing we need to do is look at our circle here, and then determine all the possible keys with 4 sharps or 4 flats. Now, working clockwise, as you know, we're going to have sharps. So in a major key, it's going to be an E. In a minor key, it would be a C sharp minor. And then if we have to work anti-clockwise, we can say it's either going to be an A flat major or an F minor. So basically, by just knowing we've got 4 black keys in there, we're presented with 4 possible keys, either E major, A flat major, C sharp minor, or F minor. So basically that means we've got the following scales. I'll just post them up here. We've got E major there, which is E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp. We have A flat major, which is A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F and G. We have C sharp minor, which is C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A and B. And finally, F minor, which was F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat. So it's one of those 4 keys. We'll say, which one is it? Well, we need more information than just knowing it's a few black notes. And usually the best place to examine is the chord progression. That's if there is one in the music you've chosen. You see, as we learned in the previous DVD, chords cadense, and if you can identify those 2 chords in the cadence, the V to the I movement, then you'll have a bloody good idea of the track, since 99.9% of the time tracks will have a perfect cadence from its dominant to its tonic. And also, since most chords will start on the tonic, that's a good indication of our key right there, and we can further confirm that suspicion by also looking at the dominant. Now, in our imaginary notes that we have here that were written down, we'll say that our imaginary track starts with the chord of C sharp. Now, C sharp only appears in C sharp minor. So from the very start, there's a very good chance that that's our key. But we need to take into account as well that the original composer may be playing around with accidentals, but we can further confirm our suspicion of C sharp minor by looking at the dominant chord. Now, in our notes, we'll say that this dominant chord is a G sharp. Now, this is another note that doesn't exist in any other scale, any of our other 4 scales there, so we can confirm that the key of this imaginary track is C sharp minor. Now, let's say we've got to approach this again, but there's no chords, so therefore you can't use them. In cases like that, it's worth looking at the melody, since that's the next most common instrument. Now, in some cases, the melody will begin on the key of the music, but it's not always the case. So rather than look for the tonic from the start, what we need to look for instead is the dominant. Now, I've mentioned this before in the previous DVDs. I'm going to mention it again, that the whole point of any music is to interact between the tonic and the dominant. So you just need to examine the notes and interplay a little more. The dominant is going to feature heavily in the melody, as will the tonic. So we just need to see which 2 notes occur more frequently than any of the others, and that's going to give us a really good indication of the tonic and dominant. And once we know those 2 notes, we can then reference them against our circle of fifths and see what scale the 2 notes exist in. And if they stand a 5th interval apart, basically we're pretty much there. We know what the key would be. Now, as you can see there, it is simply down to a process of elimination. You slowly eliminate the possible keys until you find the correct one. Now, this is something you will become better and better at as you practice and work with music. Just remember that we all follow the same musical theory. It's why a theory is developed, and the more you write music and examine other people's music, the more adept you'll become, until eventually you can listen to music and actually hear the tonality. You can hear where all the notes are supposed to be leaning to, and basically the full musical piece will tell you the key. But that's something that's going to come with experience. So you can't just expect to watch a video on how it's done and then expect to be able to do it. You've got to practice it. You've got to get some experience behind you, and it'll start to become clearer and clearer. Now, the circle of fifths has got further uses beyond that, because we can also use it to work out key modulation. I touched upon modulation in the previous Fundamental DVD, actually, but just to recap, modulation on a fundamental level is moving from one key to another key partway through your song. Now, that sort of movement can be incredibly important for dance music. Moving one key to another higher pitched key, it can inject a huge amount of energy into the music. An obvious example here is Hands in the Air trance. That often employs key changes, moving from one key to another just as it reprises from that breakdown. But there are less obvious examples. Electro, for example, that occasionally modulates through different key. I've noticed some tracks in house do it, and bassline does it as well. So, I mean, it's something that's worth learning anyway, and we can use the circle of fifths here to also do that. Now, when we modulate to another key, we need to be careful that we don't modulate too far. The smoothest modulation you can have in music is moving from one key to another key that only has one note difference between the 2 scales. So, for example, if we're working in C major here, the next key with one note difference could be a G major or an F major, since both those there are only one step away from the C. As another example, we could say there we've got D. Now, the next closest modulation to that would either be an A or a G, because again, they're only one step away in either direction. Now, of those 2 there, I would suggest moving from a D to an A. Now, the simple reason for that is because modulating upwards in pitch adds energy to the music. If you move down, for example, move down from D to a G, you remove an awful lot of energy, and the music seems to pull you down. Now, that can be okay in some cases, particularly if we're looking at genres such as lo-fi, where it is quite slow and the music can be quite down at times, but generally for most genres of dance, if you're going to modulate, you want to modulate upwards. Now, you can modulate further than just one step either way if you really want to, such as we could move, say, from D to E or D to C, but the further you modulate away from your original key, the more disjointed the music tends to sound, so you do need to be careful. If you move too far, it's going to sound like an entirely different record and you'll just mess up your track. Now, as well as modulating to a different key, we can also modulate between major and minor scales. Now, this is something else I touched upon in the previous DVD on harmony when we talked about moving from minor to majors and majors to minors through chords. Now, as I mentioned there, when we work in a minor key, we're often left with this instinctual urge to move to a major key. We don't have to move to a major, but sometimes the music really tends to benefit from just moving from a minor to a major for a short period of time and then you move back down to the original minor key. Now, as I mentioned in the last DVD, you can't just move from any minor key to any major key because it sounds pissed. You should only really move between relative keys. Basically, the minor should move to its relative major and vice versa. And now, if you're thinking about that, it'll probably come as no surprise to learn that the circle of fifths has all that figured out as well. As I mentioned in the last DVD on harmony, all major keys have a relative minor, and basically it's calculated from the amounts of sharps or flats that each scale has. For example, C major has no sharps or flats. A minor has no sharps or flats, and therefore A minor is a relative of C major. Now, if you look at this circle of fifths, you can see the answer there straight away. You can see that B minor is relative to D major, E minor is relative to G major, F minor is a relative of A minor, A flat major, sorry. G minor is a relative of B flat major. The circle pretty much has it all calculated for you. You just need to look up one from the circle or down and you can see the relative majors and minors. Now, hopefully by now you're beginning to see why musicians continually bang on about this circle of fifths. It just provides an easy way to work with music. By just memorising this circle, you can quickly determine the notes within a scale, you can calculate the key of a song, and you also can calculate the relative major and minor keys. Now, before we move on to the next session where we are going to start delving into the theory of melody, one final thing I do want to mention here about the circle is when we're constructing chord progressions. Now, I know this DVD is about melody, so why am I banging on about chords again? Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, we are reaching the stages of theory where everything is going to intersect now. Our journey into musical theory is all combining together to produce a final picture. And this is where it all ties together, so you can see how it all works. So I do want to just mention this about chords and show you how it ties together. Now, the reason that this circle of fifths can help with chords is that, if you recall in the previous session, we said that most powerful chord progressions are natural. And they sound that way because they share certain harmonic principles with one another. I mean, in that DVD, we found that the tonic, subdominant, and dominant were the strongest chords, and that's the I, IV, and V. Now, I'm just going to call up another circle here and look at this. Can you see there? We have C sat at 12 o'clock, then we move to the left with the F, move to the right, we have the G. Now notice that that's our subdominant chord, that's our tonic, and that's our dominant chord. In fact, if we look at that circle and basically say that the three across there, those positioned at 11, 12, and 1 are the major chords. And we can also say that if we look at these positioned at 2, 3, and 4, they're the minor chords. And then we have the final chord here, the 7th chord, sat there at 5 o'clock. Now, if you look at this closely, you may see something even more important about this. Basically, if we move anti-clockwise around this circle, the chords produce a natural progression with a natural pull. They flow E to A to D to G to C. It's a natural flow. For example, if we started the progression from D, our chord progression, we could then move to the G and then to the C, which produces a popular progression, basically the 2, the V, the I, or the D minor, the G to the C. Basically, in this circle, chords like to move in an anti-clockwise way. For example, we could look at this here, the A minor. We could move from A minor, D minor, G to C. And that's a pattern we used in the last DVD. We moved anti-clockwise around this circle. Now, I must stress here that it's not always the case, and you shouldn't rely entirely on that circle of fifths for a progression. And it's for that reason why I didn't want to discuss this circle in the previous session. I found that if you rely too much on the circle to produce your progressions for you, they tend to sound a little tepid, a little programmed, a little boring. So use the circle by all means, but don't forgo the previous DVD. You'll find that you will generate much more interesting chords if you follow the technique in the previous DVD rather than just sit here with the circle of fifths and trust that. Use a mix of both together, and that's how you come up with good chord progressions. And at that point, what I want to do now is I want to move onwards. There is more to these circle of fifths than I've done here. There's an awful lot more to it. I could dedicate an entire DVD to it, but from a dance production perspective, we've covered enough we need to with our circle of fifths there. So as you've seen, it's incredibly handy and it's worth memorising. Now, I have included the circle of fifths in the booklet that came with this DVD, along with the sayings of Father Christmas and his electric blanket given to me dad. So pin them next to your mixing desk, your keyboard, your computer, whatever, and just spend 5 minutes every day staring at it. And if you do that, I guarantee you that in time it'll become imprinted onto your memory, and you'll be able to amaze your friends at parties with your knowledge of the notes that go to make up scales. Either that or you'll end up with no friends whatsoever. I mean, either way. For now though, what I want to do is I want to turn our attention to melodies again. And using our circle of fifths and our knowledge now of the melodic minor scale, I want to start examining the theory of melody a little more closely, and we'll have a look at what works, what makes melodies, what makes them work, and what makes them memorable.